Hello, hello. Good afternoon and welcome to the Brooklyn Museum. My name is Lauren Celaya and I'm the Director of Public Programs, and it's my distinct honor to put together these kinds of conversations that welcome contemporary artists to reflect on historic exhibitions that we have on view at the museum. We want to thank some of our friends and supporters that are here with us today. First, our friends at the Council for African American Art, Directors Circle, and the Young Leadership Council. Thank you so much for your support of the museum and our exhibitions. And I also want to thank our members. Just by a show of hands, how many members do we have in the audience? Amazing, thank you so much. So if you aren't a member, the holiday season is coming up, so we hope you'll consider giving the gift of membership. Members get 40% off of all of our public programs and free access to our film screenings, as well as our exhibitions. So we hope you'll consider giving the gift of membership this holiday season. So today we're going to be hearing from 3 artists who are working in the legacy of Seydou Keïta: Bisa Butler, Keisha Scarville, and Hank Willis Thomas. Yes. So just some housekeeping. Each of the artists is going to give a 10-minute presentation on their work, and then we'll have a roundtable conversation hosted by the brilliant Catherine E. McKinley, who's the curator for our special exhibition, Seydou Keïta, A Tactile Lens. So I'm going to introduce folks one by one, and of course you'll hear from them individually as well. So Bisa Butler is a textile artist known for her vibrant, larger-than-life quilted portraits. While earning a master's in art from Montclair State University, she took a fiber arts class where she had an artistic epiphany. As a child, she said, "I was always watching my mother and grandmother sew, and they taught me. After that class, I made a portrait quilt for my grandmother on her deathbed, and I've been making art quilts ever since." In addition to her career in visual art, Butler was a high school art teacher for 10 years in the Newark public school system and 3 years at Columbia High School in Maplewood, New Jersey. Her work is in the collections of course, the Brooklyn Museum, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Perez Museum of Miami, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, as well as many others. Keisha Scarville weaves together themes dealing with loss, latencies, and the elusive body. Her work has been widely exhibited, including in the International Center of Photography, Studio Museum of Harlem, shout out to our colleagues there who just reopened, Huxley Parlor in London, ICA Philly, Contact Gallery in Toronto, Lightwork, and of course the Brooklyn Museum and elsewhere. I'm purposely not even mentioning a lot of these West Coast institutions because we're here. She is currently a visiting professor in the Department of Art, Film, and Visual Studies at Harvard University, and she's a faculty member at Parsons School of Design here in New York. Her first book, Lick of Tongue, Rub of Finger on Soft Wound, was published by MAC and shortlisted in the 2023 Aperture Paris Photo Book Award. And her second book with MAC is scheduled to be published in spring 2026, so something to look forward to. Last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Hank Willis Thomas, who is an artist who lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. He's a conceptual artist working primarily with the themes related to perspective, identity, commodity, media, and popular culture. He's been exhibited in the US and abroad, including at the International Center for Photography, Guggenheim Museum Bilbao, Hong Kong Arts Center, and of course he's a beloved artist within the Brooklyn Museum's collection as well as the previous two. His collaborative projects include Question Bridge Black Males, In Search of the Truth, Writing on the Wall, the Gun Violence Memorial Project, and For Freedoms, an artist-led organization that models and increases creative civic engagement, discourse, and direct action. He's been awarded numerous awards and fellowships, most recently from the US Department of State Medal of Arts honoree in Washington. And his public art practice can be seen across the nation, including here in his home borough of Brooklyn. He also holds a BFA from New York University and an MFA from the California College of Arts, San Francisco. And last but not least, the illustrious Catherine E. McKinley, who I have so much respect for her curatorial integrity with putting together Seydou Keïta, A Tactile Lens. She's a curator and writer whose books include the critically acclaimed Indigo, A Journey Along the Ancient Indigo Trade Routes in West Africa, and The Book of Sarahs, a memoir about growing up Black and Jewish in the 1960s through 80s. She's taught creative nonfiction writing at Sarah Lawrence College and Columbia University. Her latest, The African Lookbook, A Visual History of 100 Years of African Women, is scheduled for release, or it's out already, right? This must be an old bio. Okay, can folks get this book? Yes, okay, amazing. So you want to pick that up as well as the catalog for Seydou Keïta, A Tactile Lens. And she curates the McKinley collection, a personal archive representing African photographers from the 1870s to the present. So please join me in giving a warm Brooklyn welcome to Catherine E. McKinley.
Hi, thanks so much for coming out. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm a little bit fuzzy. But I want to thank Lauren and Margot and Keith in particular and all the Brooklyn Museum crew for putting this together so expertly. And of course the artists. It's really a pleasure to have you all here. I can't think of better artists to engage with Keïta's work, which you'll see there are just some wonderful connections there. I'd like to start with a few remarks about Keïta, just to frame our discussion, and then also give you something to carry into the galleries. I hope you'll go and take a look afterwards, or look again if you've already been there. So first, we're just going to show you a 1-minute video clip of the Malian filmmaker Abdourahmane Sissako. He's speaking about Keïta.
Je voudrais tout d'abord enlever mon bonnet pour saluer la mémoire d'un grand artiste, mais surtout d'un grand homme. J'ai rencontré Seydou Keïta en 1993 à Paris. Et cette rencontre a été bouleversante dans ma vie parce que j'ai rencontré l'humilité d'un homme, aussi un homme très très sensible. Et parler de lui aujourd'hui avec des mots, alors qu'il était le maître de l'instant, c'est-à-dire la photo, le portrait, est quelque chose de très difficile. Seydou, un jour, lorsqu'il a été interviewé à Paris, disait à la journaliste qui était en train de commenter combien ses photos étaient magnifiques, combien son cadre avait une profondeur, combien l'image prenait une force. Il y a eu à peu près 1 minute, peut-être le temps que je fais ici pour vous parler, de parler de l'artiste. Et Seydou a été très très surpris et peut-être dérouté par tous ces commentaires élogieux et positifs. Et comme toute réponse, il a dit ceci. Bonsoir madame, merci pour tout ce que vous venez de dire, mais vous compliquez mon travail. Moi, ce que j'ai toujours fait, j'ai regardé dans le cadre et j'ai fait mes photos. Et c'est ça mes photos. Merci à vous.
I love that. I just recently learned of this clip, and after a year and a half of complicating Keïta quite a bit, in an attempt to also bring him to a place of understanding, because I think we don't know very much about who Keïta is. So I'll just share a few things about who Keïta really is, even from an objective standpoint. Keïta was the second Malian photographer. As his octogenarian brother Abdoulaye Keïta says, we only had a mirror, no fixed image, until Keïta. That was Keïta's inheritance. Keïta himself did not have a significant photographic inheritance. European photography appeared in Mali in the 1930s. Unlike Senegal, with a cosmopolitan community of photographers, including African Americans, Lebanese, Europeans, and other African nationals by the 1860s. He had French and American B cinema, one photo supply store and lab servicing West Africa, little print, except theoretically the Islamic broadsides from the Middle East and Senegal. He was unschooled except for some Quranic studies. He was self-taught, a craftsman who won at colonial exhibitions in carpentry. He was adept and skilled in many different areas of craft. He was a tech engineer, an automotive engineer. So his photographic language is self-taught until midway in his 14-year career. He practiced for only 14 years, so from 1948 to 1962. He was a dandy, and he's talked of in scholarship of the past 30 years primarily as a stylist. But I'd like us to challenge that, taking him and his work into the world of design language, remembering he was influenced by one of the most diverse and cosmopolitan cultures in the world with its own history of modernism. He had a profane use of textiles, adding prayer scarves ostensibly from Mecca to cover a side table. His bedspread was perhaps his most famous backdrop. He talks of many of his choices as accidents. His legacy is very specific and singular, is a very specific and singular design language that's often repeated. It has reached into the global culture, continuously referenced and sometimes commodified by fashion designers, social media creators, but without examination. No one else was Keïta. He achieved all that he achieved in just one shot, so he took only one photo for each sitter. So now it's time to turn it over to our guests, and each of them will share a few slides, and then we'll open up a discussion. And I think we have time for maybe only 2 questions at the end, but unfortunately. But I'm sure you won't, like me, you want to hear from the artists, so we'll move on from here. Okay, Keisha, you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bisa Butler, and oh, thank you. It's a true honor to be here with you all today. I'm a huge fan, and I consider myself a great, well, let me not age Mr. Keïta too much, a granddaughter of Seydou Keïta in his artistic traditions. I'm a person who makes quilted portraits, and the image that you see on the screen in front of you is an example of some of my work. This actually, I am a daughter of Louisiana. My mother's from New Orleans, and my father's from Ghana, West Africa. And he always told me growing up that we descended from Mali. And his people came from Benin and Mali and walked through the mountains and descended into northern-day Ghana. And when they came through the mountains, it looked like they were coming out of the clouds. And they called those people the Bisa, the people who came from the clouds. And that is my nickname as well. I'm showing you this image so that you could see the details, but I'm heavily reliant on photography. I really couldn't do my work without it. I started out as a painter. I went to Howard University, and after I graduated from Howard, I started moving into fabric work. I was pregnant with my first daughter, and I couldn't stand the smell of the paint. It made me super ill, very sick, and one of my professors, who happened to be from the Afro-Cobra genre, the Afro-Cobra school, said, "Why don't you use yourself? I've always dressed like this my whole life." And he's like, "I see nothing of you in your work. Why don't you use fabric?" And when I graduated from school with my degree in painting, miraculously, I stopped painting altogether and used fabric like it was paint. My subject matter, it has always been reflecting and revolving around family. I started looking at my family photo albums and creating portraits of people around me. I worked for many years, as Catherine said, as a high school art teacher, and my friends and family supported my work and helped me out, but I didn't have any sort of national recognition. Chadwick Boseman, who you see here, was one of my classmates at Howard University. And after he passed, me and the world were deeply affected by that, and I wanted to create something to represent him. So I'm gonna forward a little bit so that you all could see the portrait that I made. So I found the photo online. Again, I reach out to photographers all the time. This was an AP photo, and I had to track it down. Who's the original? Who owns it? Who do I need to talk to get to use this image? And after a lot of back and forth, I finally got permission. And I'm using fabric to tell the story of Chadwick Boseman. I feel like I know, not that I feel, I know I am influenced by Mr. Seydou Keïta in the way that he used his environment around him. Well, Catherine, when you mentioned his bedspread, a lot of my fabrics were given to me by my mother and my aunts because I couldn't afford to buy fabric. So I'm using fabric remnants from clothing. So every time you see my artwork, my quilts are made from fabric that people wear. These are the fabrics that people wear in Ghana and West Africa and throughout the continent and the world now. This particular fabric design was designed in Holland, that background with the green rainbow. And when I saw that, it was a designer's take on the landscape in the Congo. But I thought about Chadwick as he had passed on, that it was my hope and my prayer that he was somewhere peaceful. And half of my family is Catholic, the other half is Muslim. Don't even ask how this comes together. But in both of those traditions, they talk about heaven, and the Muslims tend to say paradise. So I wanted to put Chadwick in a place where I felt he would be residing forever. And the name of the piece is Forever 2020. This is a quilted artwork that was recently on display in Los Angeles with the Jeffrey Deitch Gallery. And it's more than influenced, it is a take on another African photographer by the name of Jean de Para from the Congo. And I'm showing you the details so you can again see the work. I am reliant on photographers for their eye and the way that they see the world so quickly. It's interesting to hear that Mr. Keïta only took that one shot, because that pushes forward his brilliance and illustrates it even more, that he has seconds to figure out what he's going to say about this person or these people, and these remnants have resonated so powerfully, like through the generations, that an artist like me is still learning from the school of African photography. They see things in a second, but it takes me months to finish my artwork. One eye can take 3 hours long. Everything you're seeing here is a tiny piece of fabric. It's either velvet or lace or tulle or netting or sequins. And I'm using brilliant fabrics because I want to say something about the person and their interior. Yes, I think that this was a beautiful young couple, but I also want to say that I think that their African texture, that Afro texture hair is beautiful. So I'm using the sequins and the velvet to illustrate what it might look like, but I'm also saying something to you about what I think it is. I'm using sparkly rhinestones and jewelry because I want to say something about the beauty that I see in dark skin, and also the beauty that shines from all of us as human beings. Thank you. This is a work of another young photographer, a living photographer that I found online. People ask me, where do you find your work? Everywhere. I look on Instagram, Pinterest, and I go down rabbit holes of research trying to figure out who is who. This is done by Joe Nickel, and I learned something else today very quickly. I did not know that Seydou Keïta was a Nandi. And this young man comes from a group of dandies, Les Sapeurs. If any of you have heard of Les Sapeurs in Congo, they're a group of people who live and breathe fashion, and they have a prayer, the Sapeurs' prayer: as long as heaven and earth exist, the rules of fashion will never die. And this young man is standing in front of other Sapeurs who he works with. They live and breathe fashion, they love design, they love name brands, real name brands. It is said, I don't know if that's true, that they will buy a Gucci belt over paying the rent. And this is my interpretation of this young Sapeur. His name is Aksanti Karume. And I wanted to use the African fabric to tell you all something about him and then also about myself. I'm using that fabric on his sleeves. It has little eyes all on it, and that's known in Africa as the eyes of my enemies. So basically, all his haters are always checking him out. I put Gucci on the soles of his feet so that he can have that Gucci and that recognition, but also I'm saying to you all that I feel like he is better than the Gucci. Gucci is sweating him, and that's why he's stepping on him. And then this is a close-up detail. I do want to say no haterade to Gucci. On his tie, you'll see a horse, and that is a particular fabric used a lot. It's very popular, and it's le coeur de cheval originally, but the women in the African marketplace, they name fabric themselves. The people who own the most successful market stalls, those women are named the Nana Bens or Mama Bens. It's basically a rich woman, a big woman. She's rich, she eats well, and she has a big Benz. And they're the ones who name the fabric, and they call that fabric with the horse, I run faster than my enemies. So I put that, and I use that fabric a lot as an embellishment, a token to say that he will succeed. And then I want to stop my talk with a portrait of the illustrious Trevor Sturman, a young photographer who I think he did a series of photographs in the gallery. He's in the show. And I did a portrait of him a few years ago. He's a brilliant South African photographer, designer, a global citizen. Thank you.
Hi. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to first, before starting, say thank you to Catherine, Brooklyn Museum, Bisa, Hank, everybody for being here today. I'm really excited about this. I may complicate, so I'm just going to let you know that right now. And I have something written because there's so many thoughts that run through my head, I just have to have stuff written down. I'm often looking back at images of the past, not just images of my family, but also as an image maker, one who has been in love with photography since a teenager. I'm always curious about how individuals, particularly Black, brown, African bodies, fashion themselves for the camera. I first encountered Seydou Keïta's work in the mid-1990s through his book, the same name. The image of the cover was of a woman looking over her shoulder, and I was transfixed by her gaze. I was struck not only by the lovely attention to fabric and style in Seydou Keïta's images, but the presence of the individuals in the images. They are poised, graceful, hold a dignified assertion, delicate and soulfully statuesque. They are cool. I see familiarity in the images. I see my parents. After seeing the exhibition here at the Brooklyn Museum, I returned home and spent time with two images of my parents taken in the 1950s in Guyana, South America. At the time, the country was a British colony and moving towards independence, which was finally achieved in 1966. I asked my parents, from way back, I asked my parents about these images, and there's such a wonderful overlap. My dad informed me that this was not his motorcycle, but he wanted to be photographed, leaning on it to confer a visual sense of ownership. My mother told me the photographer, who was Afro-Guyanese, instructed her on how to pose in order to look her best. This reminded me of Seydou Keïta. It reminded me of Seydou Keïta's active direction as an image maker, and how these images become declarations of becoming as visual resistance. There was a desire to emulate his work, but also not wanting to approximate what has been done so incredibly well. I became committed to sharing his work in the classroom. I also spent many, many, many years as a high school teacher as well. And I know that route, I know that life. I do. It's a wonderful life. When my mother passed away in 2015, I was determined to create work that celebrated her affinity for style, colorful fabric, and patterns, something that she languished in when she and my father moved to the United States in the late 1960s. I thought about Seydou's images. New questions came up for me in relationship to his work. How does fabric hold the body and conjure presence? How can patterns, fabric, and textiles signal its own narrative, creating a unique African visual matrix? Excuse me. Something that obfuscates the functionality of photography and the Western gaze, creating a colonial visual rupture. What does the material do in the image? What does the presence of textile in the image, and what does it do, and how does it complicate space? This is what I inherited from Keïta. In the images, I'm cloaked in my mother's clothes, but I didn't want them to function as a skirt or something. I wanted them to do something else. And I thought about Keïta's images and his attention to the pose. But I was also interested in the counter pose, something that wasn't dictated by the formalities of a traditional portrait. And thinking about in terms of thinking about my mother's clothes and my mother's fabrics, what does the body look like when it moves through grief? There was also a refusal to engage the camera, and more leaning towards wanting my body or wanting presence to linger. I wanted to hint at what was unseen. Seydou Keïta's legacy has brought me to think about the patterns of my mother's clothes, but also thinking about patterning as a tool for becoming, and the image becoming navigational. His work holds and opens up, for me as a photographer, opens up thresholds that resist Western ways of seeing, and brings into the visual image another way to engage the solidity of being. And I'm gonna pause here. I wanna talk about this work, but well, I'll say real quick. When I saw the show, I wasn't actually, one of the things I was really struck by in the show was his ID photos. And I was not aware of that work at all. And it made me think even more about the function of the camera and the utility of photography and how that becomes a space that bestows access and movement. And even thinking about some of the work that I've been doing around my father's passport image and thinking about that as a place to kind of complicate. So I'm hoping to talk more about that or just kind of engage that in the conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hank. How are you? I've been on the stage a lot of times, and actually what I like about the stage more than anything is that I can see almost everyone's face, even in the dark. And I think a lot about what it means to come somewhere like this, and how many dreams are fulfilled in moments like this. My work greeted you downstairs. It says love overrules or love rules, depending on how you read it. These are words that were introduced to me by my cousin, Sunga Thomas Willis, who was murdered on February 2nd, 2000, and I found it on a recording after he died. And I've been choosing to carry his words forward through my work in various places. And I would say that although he and I were peers, I consider him an ancestor. And I think a lot about how we are all an amalgam of all who came before us, all who lived with us, and all who will come after us. And if you think about space and time in the truest sense, it's not linear, it's infinite. And I am inspired by people like Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, who played this infinite game, which was about creativity, love, and community. And I was grateful in 2023 to be able to install the Embrace Monument to Dr. King and Mrs. King on Boston Common. It's the largest monument to love in the country, or maybe the world. And I believe that we need more artists and more people consciously and unabashedly making monuments to love in our society. We have a plethora or an overabundance of monuments to war and to heroes of war. And I think we reap what we sow. And I, whenever given an opportunity or see an opportunity to put a work in public space, I choose to make a gesture or remind people of how a gesture can actually be a form of communication. I love when I get to speak with sign language interpreters, because it's a language that is so beautiful and so necessary. Thank you. And so you'll see that hands play a role in a lot of my work. This is a monument I just installed at Davidson College. It's a monument to the enslaved and exploited people who built Davidson College. Thought I had another image of there. But I think about this, this idea of working with hands, because not all of us have hands, but all of us know what it's like to be held by hands. And arguably our first interaction outside of the womb is in someone's hands, and we are nurtured and carried in someone's hands. And I think about that metaphorically when I think about my interactions or understandings of the work of artists who came before me, the work of artists who work simultaneously, who are each other's peers and ancestors. In this work, I think it's called Icarus in the Moonlight. It's a collage that blends the work of Aaron Douglas from the cover of the book, The Blacker the Berry, and Matisse's Icarus from his jazz series. And Matisse came to Harlem, and Henri Matisse, famous painter, later collagist from France, came to Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance and was dramatically altered in his understanding of what is important to tell and how to communicate that. And one of his most iconic series was this jazz series. And so I always love to think about how artists are each other's ancestors and descendants. And embedded in that, though, are also images that are, when you take a flash photograph or see the work under certain light, you'll see all of these other images that are revealed that were taken all over the world, but by of largely nonviolent political moments and movements, which I think are also part of the descendants of the Harlem Renaissance, and moments where people broke from the system, or became a ghost in the machine and challenged what we knew. And so I've done this with various artists, such as, in this case, Aaron Douglas and Roy Lichtenstein, and I think this is another Aaron Douglas work, or part of one. And then at some point I worked with Matisse, Aaron Douglas, Romare Bearden, and at some point I came across that image of The Man with the Flower by Seydou Keïta, and felt compelled to just make this reference through this in this collage, this idea of this beautiful a person holding, in this case, what turns into a red rose, being embodied by all of these other people who were likely living or working at the same time. I believe he was a civic worker, Mr. Sissoko, and I think about that. So in this piece, you'll see money, you'll see other things, and so I don't know. I just kind of organically just started falling in love with these images and just kind of making these collages that are inspired by them. I think there was something very simple, but also very powerful in the way that Keïta chose. What I love about looking at pictures is, you know how they say, you don't know about a person till you walk the mile in their shoes. Maybe you can never do that. But when you look at a photograph, you are actually looking through someone else's eyes. Literally, like the person who took the picture was looking at it, and it was only their perspective in that very specific moment of time. And whatever compelled them, whatever force chose them, got them to say, this is the moment that I want to capture, something I find so powerful. But with Keïta, what's so amazing is you don't need to necessarily see the picture. You can see the shape and already begin to recognize it. And that's the power of, I think, a really iconic artist. And I love in the work that you all showed how well you work, how masterfully you work with patterns. This is a picture of Seydou Keïta. And so I'm just kind of in this kind of experience of finding, I'd done a bunch of other work, referencing other artists, and then I kind of came and got stuck here and couldn't help but just kind of revel in this. And so when Catherine came and talked to me about this exhibition, I was so excited because there are so few people who have done as much work as you to kind of go along the trail, to engage with the families of the artists, to collect the work, to preserve the work, and the fact that you have this iconic, largest museum exhibition to Seydou Keïta is so important, especially in a time like this. So thank you for carrying this legacy forward, and I'm just happy to be here, so thank you all. More pictures.
Thank you all. I think we'll try to, there's so much to talk about, so I just want to ask one quick question, and then I think we can circle back to some of the things that you raised. But I'm interested in what your first interaction with Keïta was like. Where did you see the work, and how did it impact you? How did it inform what came next?
Are you asking Hank?
You can start.
Oh,
I'm looking at
I like
you.
that. Are you asking
I'm looking
Hank?
everywhere.
My first memory of seeing Seydou Keïta's work is 1993. My mother, Deborah Willis, is an artist, an art historian, and a curator and a photographer who specializes in the legacy and imagery of African American photographers. And there was a book that she had, and I just remember seeing this image, and it felt both old but also very contemporary. And I couldn't figure out when it was made. I couldn't tell if it was like modern fashion or if it was an older image. And I also hadn't seen a name. I couldn't figure out how to pronounce the name, which is part of why I remember it so specifically.
And as far as myself, I actually don't remember when my first interaction was, but when you mentioned your mom, I was thinking my father has his library of books. And so growing up, I grew up looking at the authors' names like Wole Soyinka, Ivan Van Sertima, and just pulling out the books and looking at the images in them. I'm pretty sure I must have come across the man with the flower image, and I think it's so beautiful the way you interpreted that. So striking when you talked about the shapes, and it makes me wonder, what is it that drew me in? Was it the image of the man's face, or was it the shapes?
I think, like I said, I want to say I was probably at the International Center for Photography's library and saw the book. And it's, you know, I think it's work that you just can't ignore, that it automatically, I think, draws you in. And for me, I remember that cover, but I also remember the image, and I'm forgetting the background information about the image, but it's the two women.
The co-wives.
Yes. And I remember staring at that image for a while and just being lost in just like where your eye goes. And that was just something that always struck me.
Where did you first encounter the work?
I saw it in 1991 in New York at the African Art Museum. It was the first time his work was shown in North America. They were anonymous images. I think there were 3 small ones. And it just, I remember almost feeling like I was going to weep. There was something so powerful about it. It was the first time that I saw an African family portrayed like on their own terms. I grew up on Ebony Jet, National Geographic, not much other image making. So it was either like the great myths of the Guinness African kings and queens or the more abject stuff. So it was really powerful, and it was the first time I was really aware that there was African photography.
I mean, I wasn't taught about Seydou Keïta in my photographic education. I wasn't taught any African photographers or Caribbean photographers, for that matter. So that was why it was such an important thing for me as a teacher to kind of incorporate that into my teaching practice.
I think what really interests me about Keïta is that he's described as a jack of all trades, but if you even look at him in the short video clips, he was very adept technically. And he was way ahead. I mean, a 9-year-old boy who receives a Brownie camera and is able to self-train and to be, to have that kind of expertise. He really didn't interact with other people in photography until about midway in his career, which was a very short career. So I'm interested, and part of my thinking about inviting all of you is that you each have very, really dynamic, interesting technological practices. I'm amazed, like as much as you fall in love with the work, you spend a lot of time thinking about process and how did you achieve the things that you achieved. So I'm interested in that for each of you. How photo images become the basis for this other work.
I'm interested so much in what the photographer sees. How do they think that way? And so I'm interested in who's behind the lens and also who's in front. And I think when I get the privilege of studying a photographer's work, I'm sitting with it for almost 2 months. And I usually blow up the photograph, maybe like the size of this rug. And I'm starting to think about who is this person and what circumstances they live in. So what was Mali in the 1950s? This is the dawn of the liberation of Africa. And what was life for Seydou Keïta, living and working as a photographer? What is the situation politically and then socially? And that can help me create a better portrait, because I'm including the big picture that Hank includes in, what do you call those images? Are they
Retro-reflective.
Retro-reflective images, but all of those people, what is the world around, to help me create a better portrait.
So you start there.
Yeah.
And Hank, tell us about what retro-reflective images are.
Well, there's a material that we all experience in every day, which is retroreflective vinyl. It's on every highway sign, street sign, stop sign, and it's a material that when you're walking past it, normally you don't even notice it, but if you're in a car at night and you have the headlights on, it literally guides us through space. And I think that using a wayfinding material as a way to talk about history is really exciting. And so I came up with a way to print on it and make it so that images are largely invisible unless you see it under direct light.
How did you get to that place?
Am I there yet? I'm not there yet. I'll let you know when I get there, though. And this is what I think about Seydou Keïta. It's powerful when you talk about him only having a 14-year career. And I don't think that's, because he also had a 14-year independent career, right? Because he worked afterwards for the government. And so those are state-sanctioned images. But I think a lot about like how an artist can be making work for a long time, and maybe in some ways he didn't get there until he was much later when the world started to see these images that he was making. And the frame of this 14 years being like this, I would say, revelation, that the oeuvre was complete or something like that. And so I like to believe that I'm somewhere in the middle of my 14 years, even though it's been 25.
Not to be a school teacher, but I am a little bit of a school teacher. But Keïta was conscripted by the new independence government in 1962, so he was forced to go and work as a state photographer. It was an honor in many ways, and he was part of nation building with the ID photos. It was important for him to be part of that project. But the government very quickly moved into, it was a socialist Islamic government. It soon moved into a dictatorship. He was doing state events and then quickly began forced to do forensics. So he was broken by the end of that time, and he practiced very little.
Why are you apologizing for sharing that information?
No, I'd rather hear from you guys.
I could be here like and interview you because I think the journeys that you've been on and the stories, I know you have a few books, but I'm sure you could probably do 30 books on different artists that you know that you're probably the expert on. So we really, I really appreciate like how you seeing those 3 pictures of a unnamed photographer has led you on this 30-year journey that brought us here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm here for you, though. I'm definitely here for you.
Yeah, likewise.
But Keisha, to come back to the ID cards, because again, the ID cards were part of that state project. Keïta talks about, and from the history, that when he was taken into, to become state photographer, the French left, they destroyed a lot of the equipment, they took everything else behind them, and so the independence government did not have a means to produce state IDs and that sort of thing. The population had doubled within a course of 5 years, and it was very, very important to have that technology, and they talk about him rigging a bicycle with a barrel and making a dark room. And, so I'm interested in your thoughts about the IDs and your own personal history.
I think my focus, well, first let me say, like, when moving through the exhibition, when you get to those ID photos, there's something about them that feels so different, in terms of what's happening in those images versus what's happening in other sections. And, and there's always this kind of presenting of self, but there's this thing that happens for me when it becomes a state ID photo or like a state-sanctioned way of presenting yourself that, and I've talked about this before, there's something about it that I feel that tries to kind of neutralize the body, which is such a falsehood. I've been working with my dad's passport images, and similar to some of the images in the show, that these are images meant to be taken with the purpose of the body moving in the future. And so there's something about that. There's something about how one is being told how you have to present yourself in order for the image of yourself to be acceptable. So all of those things I think around identity photographs, I find, just really fascinating. And I think for me, my engagement with my dad's passport photo is really thinking about how to take the identity photo and make it unruly or uncover something that's always been there, but making it more visual.
Do you have specific questions? I'd like to hear you all engage with each other a bit. Do you have specific questions for each other? Or?
Okay.
Was Winston Kennedy a professor of yours?
He was.
Okay.
He was. He was tough.
Yeah, he was.
Speaking of my Howard professors, Professor Kennedy will really get on me because, you know, college kids, I don't know why they always try to get over, but I was definitely trying to get over, and I remember him challenging me because I wanted to make, I considered portraits a portrait of somebody, their face, their hair, or some part of their body. And I remember him asking me to create a portrait where the person wasn't present.
Wow.
And, you know, I actually still never did it at a Defiant. So maybe
it's
now
not
I
complete,
have to
yeah.
do it.
Yeah, he was also a very big influence on me.
Really?
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, that's where I kind of, one of the places where I started to work as a photographer. I helped build out the darkroom there. His son,
At Howard?
yeah, his son Kobe.
Goodness. He was tough.
Yeah.
That's what I remember. He was excellent and tough. How were your professors to you? Because you said that you didn't see African photography while you were
No.
studying.
Throughout my photographic education, you know, and it's an unfortunate thing. You know, I like to think that this is shifting now, but you know, you're taught, you know, the canon. You're taught who to emulate. You're taught who your work needs to look like, and it was mostly European or white American photographers. And I was actually having this conversation with someone about Paul Strand's book on Ghana. And
I love that book.
And so I was speaking to someone who's actually thinking about kind of working with that book, but looking at it through a different lens. So I'm saying all this to say that, you know, that the images that I did experience or was shown in the classroom were not images taken by Africans of themselves or Caribbeans of themselves.
Interesting.
So, yeah, that's the most I can say about my photographic educations. I'm not going to name professors, but
You could write it down, though.
you know what I mean? But, you know.
Were any of your professors of African descent?
In undergrad?
Yeah.
No.
Upper.
No.
No?
Deep.
Interesting.
Deep, yeah.
Hank, what about you?
What's the question?
Your professors that were in your school, were any of them, well, they don't even have to be of African descent, but were they interested in teaching subject matter related to people of African descent?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I've had a very singular education as far as it comes to that. My mother actually is a person who had a more specific experience where she was studying photography in the 70s and wasn't being taught about African American photographers, and she asked her professors about them and they didn't know anything, and someone assigned her an independent study to do that research, and that became 10 years later her first book, Black Photographers 1840 to 1940, a biobibliography. And one of the first photographers she learned about was Augustus Washington, who was in 1939 photographing it in the Caribbean as an African descended person. So I hope that there's probably a lot more there. But to know that a lot of the early black photographers were actually photographing in the Caribbean is something that tells a very different story about the history of America and the history of photography and black people. And then she's published like 30 or something more books. And so in a way, my mom was a teacher of a lot of my teachers.
Right.
And I didn't really, I was never, I've always been an above average student.
Yes.
Just above average. But I've always been adorable. And even though I might be annoying or, whatever else, I got close to my teachers' hearts.
Right.
And I was able to learn a lot about the world through getting them outside of their pedagogical relationship. And I think I like to say I learned as much. We taught each other a lot.
Right. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Augustus Washington was also in Senegal in the 1860s. He was one of the first. There were a few African American photographers there.
See, that's another book. Go ahead.
Incredible.
And he was a abolitionist and important here. So how do you arrive? Bisa, I'm fascinated by the complexity of the work, and Keisha as well. In some ways, your work seems most, to recall Keïta the most in the sense of the black and whites and the stark textile dimensions. But what's that relationship to textile? You both invoked your mothers and also ancestry.
I mean, for me, the textiles are my material, but it's interesting listening to both of you to speak, and you as well, Catherine, because a lot of the photographs that I first were inspired by were family photos. So all the photographers are untrained. It's like your grandmothers, your aunties, that aunt who always has to take a photo of you before you leave the house. Those are the images that I grew up looking at. And then the investigation into the older photographs, when you mention like 1880s, 1890s, when you find a family photograph like that, most likely it was taken by a black photographer, but maybe yes, maybe not, depending on. And then some of the photographs that I have from Africa were like tourist photos. I know you've seen, they're like postcards. Yeah. Or are they yes.
The little cardboard.
Yeah, and they're kind of like just showing this exotic person.
Yeah.
Like just a woman from Mali, I guess, but almost like a specimen. But the materials were given to me because I needed stuff to work from. But then they spoke to me because I realized these are the fabrics that my aunts and grandmothers and mothers wore throughout their life, so they have all this memory and all this history in them. So Keisha, as you were talking about your artwork, showing your mother's clothing and the fabrics that she used, that just spoke to me so much, because when our loved ones pass, we have all this stuff, and we're not really sure sometimes what to do with it, but they're leaving us a legacy. And that legacy, you see it in your work, and you see it in my work, and you see it in Hank's work. It's directly this matrilineal line, like I'm giving you what you need for your life, even though you might think this is something you need to throw out. This is going to sustain you if you pay attention to it.
I love the idea of you seeing your mother as, I don't know, a child or somewhere else, and now, so many years later, you're still with both of your parents. I love that they're alive with us in this moment. Their beauty, their courage, their journey, and I really appreciate you doing that, sharing that.
I mean, I think it, thank you. I think it also is making me think about inheritance as practice, too. That we are all working with things that have been passed down to us and making sense of it. Even not only our familial lineage, but our lineage as, human beings. And so there's something, I think, that's to that. I think for me, when my mother transitioned, prior to that, like, my thinking about photography was very different. And I think when you're kind of left with, what do I have, in the absence of, or what do I have after a loss? And how do you create a language with that, So I think that there's something that makes me think a lot about, like, how we deal with inheritance and how do we deal with this, in the most positive sense, the scraps of knowledge and being and objects that we have that are treasures now that we create work from.
I think we just have a few minutes before we open up to questions, but I wanted to remark that I was surprised to hear how much mourning is a part of all of your work. And Keisha, you in particular, the things you shared have really kind of regrounded things about the clothing. I thought of the textiles being more intentional around color and optics, but I have a different understanding about that now. I have a question. How far back does your photographic legacy go in your families? I'm just curious. Do you know when the earliest photos are? Does your Ghana family have any early 19th century work?
No, not my Ghana family, but my mother's family from New Orleans. Because they have such a long history of a black middle class, but they're not labeled.
Okay.
I did have an old photo that my grandmother told me actually was written on the back. It just said, "Mammy Round Yonder."
Okay.
And I thought that was a name for the longest. I grew up in New Jersey, so I didn't know Mammy was like auntie or person in your family. And I didn't understand that Round Yonder meant she lived around that way. But I think that's the oldest one. And I remember wondering, who was Mammy Round Yonder? What was her name? Well, who was she? Was she actually a relative? But seeing this beautiful photograph, I also thought they lived in, she had a very buttoned up lace dress on with long white lace gloves. And I thought that she was a very wealthy person. But then when I visited my family's homes in New Orleans, in Ward 3, in the 3rd Ward, they're small shotgun homes, but humble but neat homes. But it made me understand more, where did they live and how did they live? But that's the oldest that I can think of.
I have, the furthest it goes is my grandparents on my mother's side. And, I was actually speaking with someone who also moved here from a young age, from Haiti, and we were both kind of talking about that there's a point where there are no photographs. And maybe that's why we both became photographers. So I have no photographs or way of knowing outside of my dad's recollections. I have no photographs of my grandparents on my dad's side or anyone else beyond that. So the furthest back it goes is my grandparents on my mother's side.
Same. None on my father's side.
Yeah, I've never seen a picture of my father's father. But I have multiple ways of answering the question. The most straightforward answer is there's a picture of my great-great-grandparents together that I always remember seeing as a child. I remember, though, that I used to think that the world was in black and white before I was born, because all of the pictures were like black and white until like right around the time I was born. And I think a lot about that with legacy, but also Did you have that same thought? No. That's clearly what the world must have looked like. But I look at these pictures and I think about chance and just how, like, I'm sure I have looked at pictures of my biological ancestors without knowing that we're related.
Right.
By all the pictures that I've looked at, like
Yeah.
historical, like there's so many images. And that's also why I sometimes don't want to be so attached to this kind of very specific idea of who I'm related to, because I'm related to so many people that, I mean, there's probably relatives of mine in this room,
Probably.
you know, and we don't have to look alike to, like, that's what we know, that there's
You
all
may not
kinds.
be the same race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I choose to see my history in every person who came before me.
It's beautiful.
Well, I think we have time for a couple questions from the audience.
I like how you left me hanging there. Like, no, I never saw the wrong.
Sorry.
Did we get the lights on?
Yeah, if you are able, we have 2 mics on either side of the aisles. Otherwise, just raise your hand and I can run a mic to you. I saw a hand back here. Okay. I'm coming.
Hi, hello. Thanks for being here. This is amazing. I'm curious how you think about dimension in your heart, particularly starting with Hank, you know, particularly when you're doing something that's a public work. How do you even get your arms around it? And I'm interested in Bisa and Keisha, how you think about that as well.
I like that. How you get your arms around it. The embrace, yeah. I studied photography for 8 to really 12 years. And as I said, I was always like, I was good enough. But I wasn't amazing. And at some point, about 20 years ago, this device was announced. I don't even have one in my pocket, but you know what it is. All of us have cameras in our pockets. And it meant that I went from being probably one of the better informed photographers or decent photographers to just one among millions of photographers. And I lost this ability to really distinguish myself from most average photographers. And so but I had studied photography a lot, and I was left with a very deep knowledge of photographic thinking. And that forced me to start to think about how I can make art in a variety of mediums. I still took pictures, but a great one, which I took a few great ones, but they were like once a year. And so and that's where a lot of my professors came in. They were like, they didn't, you know, they encouraged me and challenged me to try and do different things, work with different mediums. And I believe if we're really quiet, we can recognize, there's a divine voice in us that speaks to us if we listen carefully. And that's how I don't wrap my arms around it. I let it wash over me. And so you'll see, I'm somewhat insecure about the fact that I'm like, it's people like, what kind of work do you make? I'm like, I don't know. Lights and prints and photography and sculpture and quilts and blah, blah, blah. But it really is, I'm a conceptual artist, but the concepts don't come from me. They come from, I feel like I'm a medium. And that's what, I mean, I believe all artists are, and that we're channeling a spirit in our work. And so I really hope through me talking about myself that way, that people that recognize that whatever they might like or love about my work or don't like or love is really, they have the same capacity if they listen and have the willingness to put themselves out there.
I think, I don't know if I want to follow that.
Then
I
lead
kind
it.
of want to let that hang there for a minute. I mean, I think for me, if we're talking about scale, I don't know if I have like a answer that kind of covers everything. You know, I think that sometimes images need to whisper. You know, I think sometimes images need to be become a space that we inhabit. And so it changes depending on what it is that you are thinking about or desiring with what you're communicating. And I mean, I'm saying that directly for me, but I'm just saying that for, in general, how I feel about images.
And I think to just break down the practicalities, I'm a quilter, so I always think about what can I make that's in front of me. And it's really good for me to speak with artists such as yourselves, because you are able to think beyond what's just in front of you. Being somebody who works with different tools, you all work with a variety of different tools. So I think it's awesome to not let what you can only make right in front of you be the limit, but what else could it be? And I like that you talked about time, too. We're all talking about these photographs, like you mentioned, when was the first one that we're aware of. I really try to think about time as a dimension and as it having no boundary, whether the person is living or past. I'm always trying to bring them back in a way, or bring, not that they left, but bring them more present. Taking a photograph from 1870 or 1970 and dealing with that person as if they were sitting across from me, and letting that live, that liminal space, like, are they here or not here? Me and this person are having a conversation and there is no time.
Yeah, I sometimes think, when I look at your work, I feel like I'm, even though they might be a portrait of someone else, I feel like I'm looking at you, because there's so much detail and so many choices that are made, and the color, the pattern, the stitching, that I often don't see, I'm like, this is this masterful being.
I understand that.
So I'm just gonna jump in. I
Yeah.
think that, like, I'm thinking about, like, your work and Hank's work, and there's something of, like, your hand in it. There's something about the way in which the image, how you're thinking about how the image gets activated, that it kind of pushes into the conversation this kind of aliveness. Like, how do the individuals in the image now become alive and become part of the space, regardless of when the image was taken.
Right.
You know?
When you mentioned, well, when the gentleman mentioned dimension, I just immediately thought of your piece in Boston. And me and John went one day and we just walked around it, and how we see images of Coretta Scott King and Dr. King all the time, but don't really think about their hands and their arms, and that you allowed us to be in that moment too. And in that space, how broad it is, how magnificent. It was
Well,
really...
maybe Professor Kennedy was talking to me. That when because that is a portrait of them without
Right.
them.
Oh, right.
That's, I could have used that.
Yeah.
We have one more?
Oh, thank you. Oh,
Wow.
Thanks, everyone. That was a really great talk, and I'm a big fan of Keïta, but I'm also working on a project about women in photography, and like present company accepting your mom. Outside of the Americas, I'm really having trouble finding women photographers from the African diaspora, like around the time of Keïta, like between then and now. So I'm curious, like Africa, the continent, or like Latin America. Like I'm mostly interested in Brazil, but like it's been really hard. So I'm curious if there's any women diasporic photographers that you all really like.
Contemporary or early?
Earlier than contemporary.
Oh, okay. That's a hard question, because I know in my research, I think in the early 1810s, not 1810s, 1910s, there is evidence of a woman whose name I don't remember in Nigeria, but it's still hard to figure out if she was a studio owner or she was an elite, she was a Brazilian returnee to Lagos, and she owned a studio. That's all we know about her. But we don't know if she used the camera or was an entrepreneur. There's very, very little history. And I know that there's a woman from Madagascar also from the late 1800s. But I like to think that we could get a public project going about this because I think there are little reservoirs of knowledge all over. But in terms of African and diaspora photographers who are female, we don't know much until the 1950s, really.
I feel like there was another woman, Ghanaian, who recently passed away.
Felicia Bond,
Yeah,
who
okay.
died, but she was, it was 1950, yeah.
1950s, okay.
But she thought, I mean, again, there's all
Another
these
book.
fine points. What's that?
Another book.
No, I mean, she thought of herself more as an entrepreneur. And I mean, Keïta did too, so there are all these kinds of things that distinguish. But that might be your project.
Felicia Bond.
I mean, more contemporary. I think there's so many.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking about Zora Poku,
Uh-huh.
Atong Atem.
Yeah.
Trying to think.
Audubon in Congo.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
what
Halle
really
Berry.
strikes me is that the innovation in contemporary black women's photography, it's almost like not having been tied to the old studio models. There's a kind of freedom to just push it in another way. So I think that's really interesting. Lauren, do we have to wrap up? Yes.
Oh.
Well, thank you all so much. This is really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a generous and dynamic conversation. Let's hear it for Bisa, Keisha, and Hank one more time. These are truly three of the most influential contemporary artists shaping the cultural landscape right now, so this is such a treat to even get you all in the room at the same time. Thank you for your generous insights. And shout out to Catherine E. McKinley for your scholarship. Thank you. Thank you for your curatorial integrity and rigor. It's such a gift to our public. And shout out to Keith, our AV tech in the back, for organizing all of this with us. And shout out to all of you for spending your Saturday with us. It's such a joy and an honor to be in community and to create these kinds of experiences. We have more programs coming up. We have an ongoing film series with our friends at the African Film Festival. The next installment will be on Sunday, November 23rd. We're showing a screening of the film called Vigne or the Wind by Souleymane Cissé from 1982. It's a satirical political drama that offers context to the time period following Keïta's practice during the political upheaval in independence-era Mali. So please come check that out. The galleries are open till 6 p.m., so we want to make sure you have some time to visit. And I'm so excited to share that A Tactile Lens has been extended through May. Yes. Because it's that good, and we want to make sure that you see it today. Come back with your friends and family, give the gift of membership this holiday season, and please, thank you for supporting the Brooklyn Museum. We appreciate y'all. Get home safe and enjoy the art.